Yeah, Stefan, it's official. Marco Reus, BVB's captain, has signed a new contract to stay with the club. Since we were recording this right after I get out of bed, I let you go through the details here.
Yeah, so the deal was agreed today on Thursday afternoon. It seems like he signed a 1 year deal, which was largely what was reported leading up to it. And I think the kind of finer details are perhaps what's most interesting. It seems as though he's agreed to a contract or a salary reduction to about 7 million euros, which I think is down from 10 million euros, if I'm not mistaken, Manu, with
That's correct. Yeah.
the usual
Yeah.
bonuses. But there's also kind of like this kind of stuff in between the hidden lines, or written between the lines, rather, shall we say, that
Mm.
he's also accepted a kind of diminished role in the squad in the sense that he's no longer an undisputed starter, which I think makes a lot of sense because there's so much speculation over Royce this
Mhm.
season as to whether he's going to stick around or not, or whether he move on to other clubs. There's a lot of kind of interest from MLS, as you've reported this season,
Yeah.
potentially, other Bundesliga clubs, perhaps even a club like Gladbach, who obviously came through at. And that all kind of hinged on the fact that, Dortmund didn't really need Marco Reus as much as they had done in the past. They'd kind of more or less moved on from him. Guys like Julian Brandt, Adeyemi, Daniel Malin, but perhaps more than anyone else, Jude Bellingham have kind of stepped into the role of kind of de facto captain, or in some cases, quite literally the captain in some match days.
Mm.
And maybe it's just poor timing, but that's also coincided with Dortmund putting together the first kind of decent title run in quite some time. So maybe Marco Reus has kind of been a victim of circumstance this season, but it does kind of feel like the club in general has moved on from him. So it makes sense that this new contract probably comes with a lot of compromises, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I've talking to people at the Marco Reus camp throughout this entire process. I think it was always in the later stages, in the last few days, the tendency was towards extending this contract. I mean, there was some thought of maybe going to the United States. The big issue here was that the markets that interested Marco Reus weren't available for him, right? We talked to something like LA Galaxy or LAFC. LAFC don't have the salary space, and LA Galaxy aren't allowed to bring anyone in the summer because they're under a transfer ban, right? Which started on April 25th. So that really limited his options in terms of going to there. And then other clubs like Inter Miami didn't have the space either. So, the moment those avenues were closed, I think the likely scenario was always for him to stay
Mm,
another year. And I think it is also something that makes sense
mm,
for both sides. Of course, it would have also been a great end to his Dortmund career if he does win the title this year and he walks into the sunset with the Meisterschale, finally having accomplished that. But having said that, I mean, you could also go back to back, the state that Bayern Munich are in right now, and it's probably going to get worse there before it gets better, and do back to back titles. And then you can still have the avenue
mm.
to go abroad. And I think, it is a compromise. It has to be a compromise. Borussia Dortmund need the money in other areas. They need to sign a certain Jude Bellingham to a contract extension, and that's going to be pricey. And you mentioned some of the figures. It's looking in what's just come in. It looks like it's between 6 and 7 million
Mm.
base, right, and then performance based add-ons, which he had previously as well. So they're saving about 3 to 4 million euros that they can spend in other parts of the squad. And then Mats Hummels, of course, his contract extension, whether that
Mm.
happens or not, it's a different question, might get you there for the rest of the way to sign someone like Jude Bellingham to a new contract. So I think this is something where both sides
Yeah,
really win.
absolutely. You mentioned Mats Hummels there. I think there's also a number of other players,
Mm,
even just over the course of the years. Like obviously Erling Haaland leaving the club also kind of opened up a lot of wages as
yeah,
well. And there's a number of kind of senior players who've moved on one way or another over the course of the years, and that's kind of
yeah.
been Dortmund's great kind of struggle over the last couple of seasons, moving on these kind of senior players who haven't exactly lived up to expectation. And I also think this kind of new role might suit Marco Rose quite well. He's still, when fit, an excellent player. I think if I'm not mistaken, he's actually joint third for goals in Dortmund's team right now. He's got 8 and 7
Yeah.
assists in 27 games. So it's not bad by any means, especially for a 33-year-old player, where in most cases, a player of that age is probably beginning to wind down. So I I think he still has a lot to offer Dortmund in terms of maybe as an impact sub or even as a player who does get a run of games from time to
Mm.
time. I'm not by any means suggesting he's not going to start games at all. Of course he will, but I think he probably realizes now he has to kind of share that limelight with the likes of Daniel Malin, Adeyemi, and other players kind of coming through. Remember
Mm.
Gio Reyna, Bino Gittins as well. So
Yep.
there's maybe basically 4 or 5 players who are kind of tapping their feet, waiting for Royce to move on or step aside and let these guys get some game time too. And also, just kind of
Mm.
finally, I mean, there's been so much made about him as the captain, whether he has captain mentality, whether he has the mental steel to kind of guide Dortmund when, like, the chips are down. And although I don't think he's losing the captaincy, I think it's quite interesting, or perhaps more favourable, that he's kind of taking a sidestep or a side back and saying, I'm still a big part of the squad, but not everything now relies on my
Yeah.
shoulders. And maybe that allows him to kind of play with a bit more freedom and no longer has to be seen as like the only adult in the room, which has kind of been the way he has been at Dortmund for a couple of seasons now.
Yeah, and I think that is a big part of this entire structure of the deal, right? I think there's a change in hierarchy, and you maybe want to avoid a little bit what's going on at Bayern, where the change of hierarchy has led to absolute chaos, and maybe easing him out and making room for other players is the way to go. Anyways, that's it. Marco Reus has signed a new 1-year contract. We're going to have him black and yellow colors for one more season, at least in the Bundesliga, which is a joy. I mean, he is, when he's on form, one of the most spectacular players, not just in Germany, but on the planet. So it's going to be fun to see him at least one more year. And hopefully he can maybe finally win the much converted Meisterschale. But that's it. We'll be back soon with more content. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.